Welcome to Master English Listening. Learn English through stories.
Once upon a time, in a small town surrounded by dense forests, there was a mysterious castle on a hill. The villagers often whispered about the strange things that happened there, especially at night. The castle was old, with large stone walls and windows that looked like eyes in the dark. Few people had ever seen the inside, and those who had never spoke of it again. One day, a young man named Thomas decided to visit the castle. He was curious and brave, but he didn't believe in the rumors that the villagers told. Thomas had heard that the owner of the castle was a strange man named Count Orlok. He was said to be very old, with a face that looked like a ghost, and people claimed he never left his castle. Determined to find the truth, Thomas packed a bag and set off for the castle. The road to the hill was narrow and covered with fog, making it hard to see ahead. As he walked, he thought about the stories he had heard. Some people said Count Orlok was a vampire, a creature that lived forever by drinking blood. Thomas laughed to himself. Vampires? That's just superstition, he muttered. I'm sure this is just a normal old man. When he reached the castle, he saw that it was even larger than he had imagined. The doors were made of heavy wood, and the air around the castle felt cold, even though it was summer. Thomas knocked on the door, and it creaked open by itself. Inside, the house was dark, and the only sound was the wind outside. He stepped inside cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the large empty halls. The walls were lined with old portraits of men and women, their eyes following him as he moved. After walking for some time, Thomas finally heard a voice. "Who is there?" It was deep and cold, like the voice of someone who had not spoken in years. He turned around quickly. Standing in the doorway was a tall, thin man with pale skin and dark eyes. The man's face was sharp and his nose was long and pointed. "Are you Count Orlok?" Thomas asked, trying to hide the fear in his voice. The man nodded slowly. "I am," he replied. "And you are not from here." "I'm Thomas," said the young man, holding out his hand. "I've heard many things about you. I wanted to meet you and see if the stories are true." Count Orlok did not take Thomas's hand. Instead, he stared at him with a strange, almost hungry look in his eyes. "Stories? People tell many things," he said softly. Thomas felt uncomfortable, but he didn't want to show it. "I've heard that you never leave this castle. Is that true?" Orlok smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I do not need to leave," he said. "Everything I need is here." There was a long silence between them. Thomas felt his heart beat faster. Something was not right, but he couldn't quite understand what it was. "Why do people say you are a vampire?" Thomas asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Count Orlok looked at him for a moment. Then, without a word, he walked slowly to the window and stared out into the night. The moonlight shone on his pale face, making him look even more ghostly. "I am not like others," he finally said. "I do not live like other men." Thomas wanted to ask more, but something about Orlok's presence made him feel nervous. He felt like he should leave, but his curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. Suddenly, Orlok turned back to face him. "You are not afraid of me?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Thomas shook his head. "No, I'm not afraid." But in truth he was lying. His heart was racing, and he could feel his hands begin to sweat. "Good," said Count Orlok. "You are brave. Perhaps too brave." Thomas didn't know what to say. He just stood there, looking at the strange man. The silence in the room grew heavier, and Thomas began to feel trapped. Then, without warning, Orlok moved quickly, much faster than Thomas had expected. He was at the door in a second, blocking the way. "You should leave now," Orlok said, his eyes glowing with a strange light. "It is not safe to stay." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "But why? What's going on here?" Orlok smiled again, but this time it was different. It was not a smile of kindness, but one that was filled with darkness. "You are very curious, Thomas, but some questions are better left unanswered." Thomas knew that it was time to leave. He turned quickly and ran down the long hallway, hearing the sound of Orlok's footsteps behind him. He didn't dare look back. When he reached the door, he could see the moon shining outside, but the path was no longer clear. The fog had returned, and it was thick, making it hard to see where he was going. Thomas ran into the fog, not knowing which way he was going. He just wanted to get away from the castle, away from Count Orlok. As he stumbled through the mist, he heard Orlok's voice call out from behind him. "You cannot escape me, Thomas. No one ever leaves once they enter." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Was it true? Could he never leave? His fear grew stronger, but he forced himself to keep running. Suddenly he tripped and fell to the ground. When he looked up, the fog seemed to clear just enough for him to see the castle in the distance. But then he saw something else. In the darkness of the castle windows, he saw the shadowy figure of Count Orlok watching him from above. Thomas stood up quickly and ran, his legs aching from the fear and the effort. The castle seemed so far away, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Finally, after what felt like hours, Thomas reached the edge of the forest. He stumbled into the open field, gasping for breath. The fog seemed to lift, and the air felt fresher. When he turned around, the castle was gone. There was no sign of it, as if it had never been there at all. Thomas never spoke of his encounter with Count Orlok again. But from that day on, He could never forget the eyes of the vampire, watching him from the shadows. He knew, deep down, that the castle and Orlok still haunted him, and though he had escaped that night, he often wondered if Orlok was still out there, waiting for the next curious soul to enter his domain.